Today we're going to look at how suburbs in Europe are different from their North American counterparts. Since 2021, there has been an increase in content talking about urban planning on this platform. By now, millions of people know the term strode, and many more in North America especially are talking about how car dependency needs to be reduced, how transit needs to be invested in, how communities cannot continue to sprawl. However, very often what I see is content focusing on very large cities in Western Europe, the places tourists will go. And don't get me wrong, I completely understand why people focus on large international cities. It makes perfect sense. However, I think by showing people how European suburbs differ from their American counterparts, people in North America might be able to see bits and pieces of how their own communities would change for the better. Change and development can happen even in smaller places, suburbs of major cities, or even minor regional cities. Not everyone can afford to live in the glitzy, newly renovated city centers, but you don't have to in order to have access to transportation and walkable neighborhoods. Europe is densifying, and the suburbs are not that far behind. To understand where Europe is today, we need to do a bit of history. Back in the 1960s and 70s, Europe was facing similar problems to what North America is facing today. Cars were becoming more common and predominant in society. Freeways were being built. People were, in general, moving out of city centers to ease up on costs or otherwise have more space for living. These outlying communities, now called suburbs, would take on a much different character compared to their counterparts in North America. The exact form of a typical European suburb might differ. Some have large 8 to 10-story apartment blocks, others have more 4 to 6-story buildings. Density is generally higher, and transit is generally a given. It's not something you automatically lose by leaving the dense urban core. To give a general idea of what I mean, let's compare Washington, D.C. to Warsaw, Poland. This may not be the best comparison, but roll with me. Washington, D.C. has a city population of 600,000, with a metro population of 6 million. Warsaw, meanwhile, has a city population of about 1.7 million and a metro population of around 2.7 million. The transit that serves the Washington, D.C. metro has to serve two functions. It needs to be a metro for city residents, and it needs to be a commuter rail out to places like Wheaton, Reston, Falls Church, Loudoun County. There is a lot of land to cover. For every community that is relatively dense, like Arlington, Reston, College Park, Silver Spring, Wheaton, there are a dozen communities that simply lack access to metro stations, meaning if you want to use the public transit, you need to drive in. Many people choose to just drive into the city directly. While the DC metro system saw an increase of ridership last year to 231 million, there are still concerns as recently as last year over budget shortfalls. With over 80 metro stations, you might expect there to be more riders. By contrast, the Warsaw Metro has just under 40 stations over 2 lines and 41 kilometers of track. The annual ridership, as of 2023, was just under 200 million annual riders. Expansions to the Warsaw Metro are underway, and there is an additional commuter rail service separate from the metro, which serves 28 stations in the surrounding community, over 38 kilometers of track. I couldn't find annual ridership figures, and I'm certain there are communities that see less coverage. But I would surmise that Warsaw in general has a higher proportion of people taking the metro to go about their lives. This metro expansion is practical and possible because the Polish government and communities surrounding Warsaw chose to not develop their communities for the car exclusively. According to one Polish source, 90% of Poles own a car to travel, but only 43% claim that it is their main mode of transportation. 1 in 5 use public transit as their main method of transportation. Similar trends exist in Western Europe as well. The Netherlands is a country in the Benelux region which has gotten a lot of good press over the last several years and decades for its investment in cycling infrastructure. Despite these investments and the benefits that they do bring, 65% of Dutch people use a car on a daily basis to get to work. Why is this? Well, most people in the Netherlands live within what is known as the Randstad, a community of cities from Amsterdam and Rotterdam to Ghent and Utrecht. The fact is that not everyone can live exactly where they work. During the 60s and 70s, cities in the Netherlands were full of cars. But despite this, no city government completely abandoned the idea of mass transit. As one example among hundreds, let's take a look at the town of Hoogvliet outside of Rotterdam. This village was first mentioned in the 1300s, and as Rotterdam grew, it became part of the wider Rotterdam metro area. Taking a look at this town on Google Street View, it seems like a very human-scale place to live. Sure, people own cars, but transit is still very much present. The town has 36,000 residents approximately, with a density of just shy of 3,600 per square kilometer. This is a very human-scale place to live, even if people own cars. The two don't have to be mutually exclusive. As early as 1968, the city of Rotterdam began to invest in its metro network. By 1974, there were 2 metro stations in Hoogvliet that would take you from the village to the larger city of over 500,000. Regional rail services to this community have since expanded as recently as 2002, with a 3rd metro station opening up. Broadly, while cycling infrastructure may not be as well maintained as in Amsterdam because of financial reasons and there being less people, it is still prevalent to a degree where the average person can take a bike and go about much of their day in town as they see fit with a bike. Cycling is not treated solely as recreation. It is instead viewed as another form of transportation, the same as walking or taking a train or, yes, using a car. These investments in rail and bicycle-based transportation were not exclusive to Rotterdam and the region. The entire country invested wholeheartedly, and with those investments today, the Netherlands has as many train stations as it does municipalities. As a legally blind person who can't drive, that access to transit and that level of investment would be life-changing, not just for me, but for millions of people. I'm sure there's somebody watching this who can relate to the fact that in the United States, driver's licenses are seen as a basic requirement for most office work because it is expected that you drive. Unless you earn a very high income and or live in a select few areas, access to reliable mass transit that somebody can walk or bike to is virtually non-existent. While bus services do exist, they are often late and underfunded. Many times they don't go where the average person needs them to go. Metro stations in cities that have them are more often than not park and ride, with the expectation that somebody drives for the last mile to get to the station and back home. As a disabled person living in this country, moving out to the suburbs means that I lose access to the tools that give me independence. Mass transit, walkable streets, streets that have things for me to walk to, dense urban living. once you move out to the suburbs, the only choice any American really has is a choice between what car brand you want. There are a few suburbs across the country that have retained their walkable character, their mixed-use zoning, their access to transit. But they are exceedingly rare because American land use has made these kinds of developments all but impossible. Even in these smaller suburbs, when they grow, they expand in a way that prioritizes single-family zoning. To live in a walkable suburb, you are, odds are, going to pay the same rent that you would in a major city, if not more, because it is just so rare. You may still even need to have a car because what is around you is not walkable. Looking to Europe, we can see that while there is a lot of car ownership, people own cars, they don't have to use them for everything. When you move out to a suburb in Europe, certainly your opportunity to use the car increases, but your access to transit, your access to a walkable environment, a bikeable environment, a place with transit options, does not decrease. Transit is always present. It is always seen as something that should exist. You can walk down to a grocery store, or a tailor, or a dentist, or a bank. That is just a common factor of life, whether you're in a town of 30,000 or 500,000. In Europe, just because you cannot drive doesn't mean you are cut off from society, dependent on someone else to get from point A to point B. I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you do, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below and subscribe for more.